Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Monday, February 8th, 2021, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. And joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
So I went back and listened to our predictions episode because I never had actually jotted down what your predictions were. So I was like, I know Logan had something with the E3 stuff. And so is he up a point or is he down a point on today's news? And it looks
What's
like
status?
You're doing well.
Oh.
I love that you don't even remember what your prediction was. But yeah, you predicted that it would move to a digital only event. So assuming today's news remains accurate, you're in good standing so far. Which will make up for the fact that you threw away, predictions on 007 Nightfire.
Although, weirdly enough, we did get a 007 game, which I would
We had already known about that 007 game, though.
Did we already by then?
Yes. We knew about I call you out in the episode of why would they do that? They've already announced that you're getting a Bond game. Why would you predict a 007 remake or a Nightfire remake?
Because I want it. But no, we are sadly not talking about James Bond today.
We do that extensively on this week's That Nerdy Site show, though.
That's true. It's a great episode, actually. I had a lot of fun with that episode yesterday. So go check that out as well. But no, in today's episode, we're going to launch into the first big story is the new Nintendo Switch sales update from the fine folks over at GamesIndustry.biz. Christopher Dring, so I'm going to pronounce his name. Sorry, Christopher, if I butchered that. Reports over that Nintendo Switch sales have officially overtaken the 3DS as Nintendo rises to forecasts for the console yet again. In terms of sold through, 74 million Nintendo Switches have been sold worldwide, putting it very much within striking distance of the Game Boy Advance at 81.5. And then maybe that's kind of it. The Nintendo Wii's possible 101, Game Boy's 118, and Nintendo DS not going to happen. 532 million Switch games have been sold since the release in March of 2017, putting it just behind the DS and the Wii, just behind, maybe a little loose, about half as many as they had. But it has been a banner year for Nintendo, a 37% increase year over year. 77% of its sales occurring outside of Japan. And digital sales accounted for a huge chunk, $2.4 billion worth of revenue. For example, a 105% increase from the year before. That their Animal Crossing turned out to be pretty dang successful, along with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which got 8.6 million units in the last 9 months. It's been, I think, as we kind of talked about a little bit off air, Trevor, we are each, I think, surprised at just how successful the Nintendo Switch has been. We checked earlier, again, before recording, the Switch is already, in terms of consoles, what was it again? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 7th best-selling video game console of all time. Give me your kind of reactions here and just how successful it's been in its first 3 years, roughly, almost 4 years.
4 years, right? Because it launched
2017.
March 2017, right?
Yeah.
So just about 4 years. I as I said, kind of before we started recording, I'm surprised. I did not think the Switch was going to do this well. I thought, given kind of the downward trajectory, with the exception of the Wii in console sales specifically, I thought the handheld nature of the system was going to put it in, spitting distance of 3DS, but it probably wasn't going to hit, because you've had on the handheld side of things, you'd had the DS, and then the 3DS sold fewer, and then so I figured the Switch would probably land somewhere below the 3DS. So the fact that it's already surpassed 3DS is a surprise to me, and certainly kind of a slap in the face to 2017 Trevor, because the big selling point of the Switch being you can play it at home or on the go, I just don't think really actually appeals to a ton of people. I feel like most people either use their system as a console or as a handheld. They're not handheld. I don't. If we ran a poll of or if Nintendo had any statistics, which I'm sure they don't because they can't get anything online wise, tracking or anything. I imagine most people would not be in the category of like, yeah, I use the Switch in both fields. It was one of those things that was like a huge selling point to critics and reviewers who were, constantly on the go for things. And it's like, yeah, but you guys are such a niche, part of the market that I don't think you're really reflecting and representative of, how people are actually going to use the system. As it is, I've only ever despite, not traveling all that much, I pretty much only use the thing as a handheld. I've plugged it in like 2 or 3 times. As it is, like I lost my docking setup for like the first 2 years of the system because I put it somewhere and couldn't find it. So yeah, I'm surprised at how well it did. Obviously, I think last year, played a huge role in that, the fact that it was the most affordable option for families that were suddenly all home, and the fact that, hey, if you really want it behaves so much more like a handheld than a console that, if you had 2 kids, you probably were picking up 2 separate Switches instead of one, PlayStation 4. So I think that really certainly helped things. But ultimately, I think you've seen kind of Nintendo really, especially the fact that like the last couple years, which has been very light in terms of like Nintendo releases, but they've been big releases like Animal Crossing doing gangbuster numbers again. I think if 2020 had been a different year, this would be a very different story. It still probably would have sold well, but not, gunning for Mario Kart 8's, I want to say they're only like 2 million units shy of Mario Kart 8, which is the best-selling game on the Switch. So I think without, everybody being at home in a pandemic last year, it wouldn't have sold nearly as well, but it probably still would have sold good. But yeah, I think that all kind of really plays into just giving them like a banner year. They were the right product at the right time for a lot of people. Which surprises me because like when you look at their 2020 games, it was Animal Crossing and the like, as I said before we started recording, the world's shittiest 3 ports that also suckered in 8 million sales. In the 3D All-Stars collection. And then Age of Calamity from Hyrule Warriors. And that was pretty much it on like the, quote unquote first party lineup, and Age of Calamity wasn't even a first party thing. So like the fact that with so few games coming out last year, they still did as well as they did. And the year before that, like they came out of the gates running in 2017 with Zelda and Mario, and as I touched on in our predictions episode, like I think we'll see both of them, get kind of proper sequels this year, not just the up port from the Wii U of Super Mario 3D World. But yeah, the fact that like they hit the ground running in year 1 and year 2, and then we suddenly got the lull of like, okay, they didn't have anything now, and so now they're waiting for like their big games to really kind of kick back up. It surprises me that even during those down years, they've been, still continuing to sell really well, as kind of, again, the affordable option that, appeals to people who aren't looking for the highest, graphic fidelity. The fact that you could find these systems more so than you can find certainly the PS5s at least, I'm sure also helps things. But I mean, that was another thing. Like last year, there was also scarcity on these things again, where like they couldn't keep them stocked. So that was another factor as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, to what Trevor just said, I mean, the Nintendo Switch shipped 24 million units over the 9-month period, which is a lot. It'll ship 26.5 million by the end of March, according to Nintendo, which is easily the Switch's best year. I mean, I definitely think there's a huge amount of the right product at the right time in the right pandemic. I think that in a regular 2020, I can't imagine it selling 24 to 26 million units, right? Or for that matter, Animal Crossing to sell just truly just like unfathomable amounts of that game. On the other hand, I'll totally eat crow and just alongside with you, where it's like I totally also did not predict it to be this successful. And like maybe that is a little bit in just the vein of the Switch has always been a weird purchase for me because I'm someone who, I got Breath of the Wild, but like I don't love Breath of the Wild, right? And I got Mario Odyssey because I love Mario games, even if Mario Odyssey is one of my least favorite 3D versions. But otherwise, like, I have played the Switch for, like, a week, a year, I feel like, since 2017, basically. I played Ape Out on it in 2019 and loved it. Ape Out's great. I really played Ape Out. It's fantastic. Well, that might have even been 2020.
Yeah, it was 2019.
It's all a blur. So, like, I played Ape Out on it. I'll play, like, a few kind of games on it, like, usually indie games. But in terms of the big, like, giant Nintendo products, right, we're each such weird allies because we're each such, I think at this point, kind of noted not Nintendo fanboys, right? Like we are people who
Nintendo skeptics.
Like Nintendo. Yeah, like we like Nintendo fine. There are certain properties that we really like a lot, but we are not Tim Geddes, and so I think it's also hard to gauge just how successful it's been, especially because I can't speak to you, but for me, I always felt like one of the reasons why Nintendo was kind of seeing diminishing returns was just a complete absence of anything. Like, there's no reason to play a third-party game on a Nintendo Switch. It's not an indie game, basically.
Right.
And its first-party games are basically, like, 2 or 3 in the entire year. And so you have to be, like, in those franchises, right? And, like, the secret about Nintendo is that, like, a lot of these franchises people really love and crave and demand and always want to come back aren't that successful, right? Like, Metroid's not that successful of a franchise. Even Zelda doesn't do, like, gangbuster numbers. And Donkey Kong doesn't either. And so it's one for me where I always felt like Nintendo was not as popular as people thought it was in terms of, like, its big franchises. And so to see it totally prove me wrong and be like, it's done pretty much the same thing. It's just done it in, like, a hybrid format and sell this successfully, right? Like, Nintendo, like, looking at the list of the best-selling video game consoles of all time, the Switch will pass the Xbox 360 and the PS3. I think we can each agree on that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I mean they've got another probably 2 or 3 years to do it, and
yeah,
and there's constantly that like rumor floating around of like a Switch Pro version or something like that, which will balloon sales up again.
Basically, the real question is not whether or not it's gonna crack the top 5. It'll pass the 360 to get the top 6, and it'll pass the PS3 to get into the top 5. The question is whether or not it'll hit 100 million, I think, is more like and that's 25 million away, roughly. And so that's and will it pass the Wii as like the best-selling Nintendo console of all time? And that's much more of an actual question. I don't know, right? Like, if we do actually get, like Trevor predicted, a new Zelda game and a new 3D Mario game, that will obviously help. If we do get a Nintendo Switch Pro Edition, that will obviously help. And then it's also just a matter of, like, how long they kind of wait before launch in the next, like, the Nintendo Switch 2 or whatever it's going to be. I think, yeah, like you said, we have 2 or 3 more years left of this console.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think there is a path where this thing passes the Wii, passes the PlayStation, the original one, and finishes as the third best-selling video game console of all time, right? Like, I don't think it's going to hit... I mean, it for sure won't hit the PS2. I still don't think it's going to catch the PS4, because that's still going to get a few more consoles sold. And it's just so far behind. It's, 35, 40 million, roughly. So that seems outside of reach. But I think it definitely has a shot to finish as the third best-selling video game console of all time, which if you had told me 4 years ago, I would have thought was absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I think it's weird because you mentioned like, a new Mario or new Zelda will help move units and stuff, and I'm like, I honestly don't know if that's what will move units at this point, because I feel like the people that would buy a Switch for Mario or for Zelda probably already have a Switch because Mario and Zelda are on the system at this point. So it's one of those things like all of their big heavy hitters in like now that Animal Crossing is out, are out. So like I don't think IP is really what's going to continue to move units. I think it really is going to be when they, release a new iteration of the Switch that, packs a little bit more power behind it or does something else, just like the Switch Lite did. The Switch Lite, moved an extra 11 million units, and I imagine a lot of those were like a bunch of people that already had the Switches or something like that. I think that's the number. I don't remember what the actual number quoted on that was, but yeah, I think we'll see. Much like we saw with the as I said, kind of earlier, maybe before we started recording, but like the PS4 Pro, ballooned up sales because a bunch of people who already had PS4s bought PS4 Pros, and a lot of people who already had Xbox Ones bought Xbox One X's and S's and stuff like that. In some cases, like idiots like me, I bought multiple PS4 Pros because I was, a sucker for like collector's editions or novelty things or whatever. So I think that's what will actually move more units is if, just like you saw with like the 3DS doing the new 3DS and the new 2DS and all that, like that whole genre of Nintendo marketing stuff. I think when Nintendo starts doing that on the Switch, they'll just get another big old boost in units sold as a result. Yeah. I don't think it will be like, oh, such and such a big game is out, now that's going to move a ton of systems, because again, any of the big marquee Nintendo franchises have already come and gone, and you would think have already, brought those people in. Maybe a new Mario Kart game or something like that, since Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is just the Wii U game ported up. So like maybe there are some outliers, people out there who are like, I bought a Wii U, but I'm not buying a Switch until there's a new Mario Kart. But yeah, like listen to how absurd that sounds. So yeah,
it is interesting. Yeah, in that vein, like the Nintendo Switch is an interesting one. This is a really interesting point, actually, I think, Trevor, that I feel like has maybe more of a ceiling potentially than a Xbox or PlayStation. Like, especially considering the install base of the past console, like who doesn't have a Switch that would want one at this point, right? Like that's an interesting way to frame the question too. Like who is like what would they be waiting for at this point? Like 4 years in, if you have a Wii U, yeah. Or if you're just someone who likes Nintendo, what would you wait for to prevent you from getting a Switch? Because even now, like the Switch is $300, right?
$200. It's down to $200 now. So that's
$200 now. So yeah, like
that's another thing that's going to also probably
balloon
like, up. Is if people were waiting on a price drop now that it's $199.
It's like I'm curious to see like how high it could go in that sense, almost because like, how many more people want a Switch that don't have one? Like, how many people are really left out there, right? Like, this console has more people, not counting the Wii, than the Wii U and the GameCube combined, plus the N64 probably, right? Like, it's we're pretty close to that. And so, I mean, 3 last 4 consoles, it's like, there aren't this many Nintendo fans just purely out there, I feel like. It is again, it's the second best selling Nintendo console of all time now, behind one that basically was all about the casual gamers reaching out to that mass, and the Switch is not really that console. And so I am curious how many people out there are still waiting to pull the trigger on buying a Switch at this point. I do think it's going to see, like, I don't predict it to sell 24 million consoles anymore, even more so with the new Xboxes and PlayStations really ramping up this year, which I think will kind of take a bite out of the Switch's numbers even more so this year. And I'll be curious to see how it kind of fares in the face of what I expect to be, hopefully, Sony, a really aggressive ramp up of the availability of the PS5 this year, and Microsoft, I'm sure, with their new console as well.
And the fact that the Xbox Series S is only $300, like, puts it in kind of the affordable conversation alongside with the Switch. But you get next-gen experiences.
Even PS5 isn't crazy. Like, even $40 is still, like, that's still, like, not, unreasonable as, like, a big, like, holiday gift or a birthday gift or graduation gift or you made it through a pandemic gift, right? Like, it's enough to where, it makes me wonder. Like we said, I think we each agree, it will pass the 360 and the PlayStation. It'll do that this year. I would have to imagine, for the Xbox 360 for sure. Ultimately, I predicted it falling like right around the original PlayStation, the Wii numbers, I think. Like 102, 100, 100, 99, 98 million, somewhere in that neighborhood, and kind of settling in at number 3 to 5 on the list. The other thing, though,
real quick, just going back to my I quoted like 11 million on the Nintendo Switch Lite.
It was 7.3.
So year to date, or not year to date, lifetime. The Nintendo Switch Lite has sold 13.53 million units in its lifetime, meaning it is close to passing the Wii U's 13.56 million. Mm-hmm. So, like, the Switch Lite alone has almost, and by this point, in reality, has probably sold more than the Wii U in its entirety. So, like, yeah, that again speaks to the conversation of, like, hey, when they iterate on this and when they release, because we're about to hit the 35th anniversary of Zelda, so when they inevitably do a Nintendo Switch that is skinned with Zelda and Link on it or something like that, like they did with the Animal Crossing Switch, that'll sell like gangbusters to a very particular market. That'll probably add to the numbers as well. So yeah, I think just at this point, like, one of the elements that I would be very curious about would also be like how many Joy-Cons have been sold, because those are astronomically overpriced and they're terrible. Like, the ones I've had since launch basically are completely screwed, and it's one of the reasons I don't play my Switch all that much anymore, is because it's got like that left Joy-Con drift or whatever. So I'll be sitting there in Animal Crossing and it'll just like start scrolling through a menu thing and I'm like, I can't, like, stop moving. So yeah, like it's infuriating how much of a pass they get on how bad that system really is, kind of in the nuts and bolts of it. But it's Nintendo, and they trade on nostalgia.
Yeah.
And it clearly works.
But the other thing I want to just kind of quickly go back to is, like we were talking about off air, the PS5 is currently at roughly 4.5 million units, about halfway to the Dreamcast and Saturn. I'm going to, Trevor, if you'll agree, dub the Dreamcast the worst selling video game console of all time. That's an actual console, not the Sega Pico or the Philips CD.
Not all those one-offs.
Exactly. The worst selling console of all time is Dreamcast and the Sega Saturn.
I mean, there's like. That's nothing new. That's the 1-2 punch of why Sega doesn't make consoles anymore, and why Sega lost the original console wars.
The Master System, only a little bit above that too. Sega really just had one really successful console. Now that you think about it, the Wii U, like Trevor said, 13 million units. The GameCube, 21 million. It is so interesting when you look at this that Sega obviously just kind of a mess. But Nintendo really does.
To be fair, like, all of those Sega units are in a very different time for the industry.
Sure, 100%, admittedly, yeah. But like, Nintendo is such an interesting one where it is such a hot and cold console system, right? Obviously, you can make the same argument about the Xbox brand as well. I don't even know where the original, the Xbox is at. And then PlayStation is the only one who's kind of had a bit more of consistency to it. Obviously, with not counting the PS5, its units occupying spots 1, 2, 3, and 5 on the top 5 all-time console sales list. It'll be interesting to see where the Switch ends up. Andy, you want to make a bold 7-year payoff prediction in terms of where you see the PlayStation 5 kind of coming in at this time? We'll say in 4 years, Trevor, at the same point the Switch is at now, where do you think the PlayStation 5 is going to look like here in 2023?
I mean, that's like, PlayStation 5 is going to be a big one in terms of like how much more they handle like price drops and also like iterations. Like, are they going to do a PS5 Pro version in 3 years or 4 years or something like that? I would look at it and probably put it in ballpark numbers of your 100 million units. I think there are like reliably, as you can see, kind of in the PS4 numbers, in the original PlayStation numbers, PS2, like even PS3. I think like there's reliably 100 million ish fans out there, kind of that ecosystem and that. So assuming it's also who knows what like a post-pandemic world is going to look like spending wise, but I'll say sure. Like for something we're never going to circle back around to, I'll say 100 million units. Why not?
No, but it is interesting, yeah. Because the Xbox did what 24 million. To Xbox One to 51 million. Damn.
Xbox One's an estimate because they stopped doing numbers very early in last generation.
The classic move you do if your console's not performing that great.
Yeah.
I'm definitely curious to see where the PlayStation 5 goes. This isn't a PlayStation 5 discussion. Obviously, it's one about the Switch, but certainly I think that building off the success of the second best selling console of all time when the PS4 isn't a bad spot to start in. I don't think it's going to suffer from the same issues that plagued kind of the PS3. But even if it ended up at the same spot, that would be still 85 plus million consoles, and I think Sony wouldn't be too upset with that.
Yeah.
But
I think we'll see a lot of like potential spikes in PS5 sales over the coming years because PS4 introduced a lot of like cool new IPs that performed really well. I agree about that. Inevitably when we get the next, and it's not a new IP obviously, but like when we get the next Spider-Man that is a proper sequel to 2018, and PS5s are available, you'll see a big spike there. Horizon Forbidden West, we'll see a big spike. The next God of War, we'll see a big spike. Potentially, if there are units out there for Ratchet and Clank, we'll see an uptick on that. If they do a Days Gone 2, while it didn't like get a lot of critical acclaim, it sold really well. If there's ever a Bloodborne 2, that'll work like gangbusters. So I think we'll see more kind of going back to the like what franchises will sell stuff. I think there are a lot more franchises positioned to sell PS5s because of the PS4 generation.
Yeah, I agree with that. But we will transition out of sales numbers, tragically, and on to everyone's favorite topic to talk about in February, E3.
Was it like the recurring tweet joke of E3's next week? Oh my god.
Yeah, E3's here, guys. We had some breaking E3 news. By breaking, I mean it happened today. From our friends now over at VGC, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
It is VGC. Great. Perfect. Yeah. The headline is simply E3 pushes forward with plans for a digital 2021 event by Andy Robinson. Game demos and keynotes are part of ESA's proposal, but it still needs backing from publishers, which is a relatively important part. I mean, this is, as Trevor mentioned at the beginning of the show, one of my predictions for this year, that E3 is just going to go all digital. My big hope, and I think it's shared by Trevor and lots of people, is that like E3 being digital, announcing it early right now, maybe we can have a bit more of a centralized summer game event thing and not spread out over 3 months, kind of a roll in this something new every other week kind of thing in terms of announcements and events, because that can be a lot. And also just hard to keep track of all the news and everything happening. Obviously, what this means for E3 going forward, I don't know. Again, as Trevor mentioned also before we started recording, there's going to be an awards show as well. No Jeff Keighley, tragically. But, Trevor, what do you make of this announcement, if it is proven to be true for E3 in 2021, and potentially going forward as well for the Electronic Gaming Expo?
I don't think it's like overly surprising. I think this is what a lot of us have been anticipating. Yeah. I think it's going to continue to push a lot of people away. Like there's just not really bang for their buck for the publishers and developers, it seems like, to pay the 6-figure entry fees to be involved in this kind of stuff, which is one of the other key elements that was thrown out there. I think as kind of my prediction that I didn't make because you kind of jumped on the E3 one, but it was basically like I think a lot of the big studios will kind of like not really participate and they'll probably do their own thing again. there's a lot of people out there kind of talking about, because like right before all this started breaking, the Jeff Keighley did kind of update the Summer Game Fest account with like new graphics and new colors and all that stuff. And so people are talking about, hey, it'd be great if all of the companies kind of like, yeah, last year they tried out their own things and it became very hard to kind of like maybe make waves, or at least kind of keep eyes on the industry over the course of the summer. So there are people out there that are certainly hoping that everybody will kind of like flock to Jeff again and like kind of let Jeff, compartmentalize everything. I don't think that's going to happen. I think every studio is going to be looking out for themselves, and they're going to be like, like we had a day or two of the news cycle where nobody else was really doing anything. So why would we want to, give up that for a chunk of the news cycle of a week of summer or something like that? So I think, and I think kind of E3 is doing the same thing where, I don't think there's a big selling point there anymore. I think last year kind of showed that, hey, the industry doesn't need E3 that part of E3. Maybe still the backroom deals that happen and stuff. Something needs to kind of like come in and replace that. As I think I touched on in one of the previous things, like, hey, maybe there is an issue with like consoles on shelves, like with the Xbox Series and then the PS5, that may track back to E3 not happening and basically Walmarts and Targets and stuff of the world not being able to say, how much do you think we should have? But I think E3 itself, like with this kind of like digital only thing, is what a lot of people have been predicting, and I don't think is going to do a lot to turn around their fortunes, because there's also still like the immediately the first things I see when this kind of stuff breaks are people quote tweeting and talking about how like, oh, also like, hey, you can pay to have your identity stolen or be doxxed or whatever, because that's still a thing that E3 never really addressed. How they fucked that up so royally in 2019.
Let me ask you this, Trevor, and I know this is like such a, I don't know, maybe like hyperbolic question, or one that's so tired and played out, but I'm going to do it anyway because I am curious on your thoughts, and I don't know if I know them too deeply. What do you think E3 looks like in, let's say, 3 to 5 years? Like, what is that event or showcase? Obviously ranging from it doesn't exist, which I don't think either of us predict, to kind of the milder side of that spectrum. Like, what does E3 look like in 3 to 5 years to you? Like, what does it, and like the post-pandemic world fully kind of removed from that now, more people have had time to kind of take stock of doing their own individual shows or Jeff Keighley's things or Kind of Funny, whatever it might be. Like, what does that event look like to you?
To me, it looks like PAX without all the things that make PAX special.
But can that survive? Is that
that's like it is a corporate sponsored mess of like Monster Energy drink mixed with like a big old Epic booth for Fortnite or something like that, mixed with Astro headsets, and it's almost entirely a consumer focused show. So it's people that grew up wanting to go to E3 going to E3 and paying to get into E3, and the media side just kind of being like, this doesn't do anything for us anymore. Like, but it's got the name recognition that PAX doesn't in the broader space. So I think that's more or less what it looks like. It's it's Embracer Group, which is formerly THQ Nordic, going and
renting
out a wing basically and having all of the IPs that they have out there, selling stuff at every booth, alongside your Astros, your Logitechs, your whoever do the chairs or whatever, like all of those companies trying to sell people. E3 constantly trying to entice influencers and streamers to them so that their audiences come and join them at the events, and people wait in line way too long to play an upcoming demo of Harry Potter, Hogwarts Legacy 2 or something like that. I think that's kind of what it probably will be. And I don't think you'll see like the first parties there anymore. but you'll probably continue to see some kind of input from some of the more like older stalwart companies, or your like kind of double A companies. I think we'll still kind of do that, and maybe if ESA pays well enough or makes the offers enticing enough, you'll see a Ubisoft come back or an EA. I think even there, though, I think you'll see Ubisoft and EA Play do their own events around the event to capitalize on those people going into LA for a week. But I think that's what it will be. So yeah, the nuts and bolts version is like PAX, but without cool indie devs and or just like the devs in general, and the cool things that we like about PAX.
I agree. Trevor, I'm gonna transition us into the shoutouts because we're gonna have 3 that we're gonna go through. But do you have any final E3 thoughts for this year and its future? Again, I kind of agree with yours. I think E3. I almost think E3 to me is a little bit of, and you touched on a little bit in your kind of statement there of like it has a little bit of like too big to fail, just because of its name, reputation. Like its name alone is far bigger than PAX's. And just carries some weight to it. So even if it is just like a PAX without the PAX stuff, that makes it fun and great, which I think is a really like astute observation. I do just kind of feel like it will just kind of muddle along for years until either it does some sort of structural change or something happens. But yeah, and definitely like the next 3 to 5 years, it is just going to be a PAX without the fun PAX parts.
Question for you, I would have to kind of turn it back around to you, and where I thought maybe you were going with that when you were like, I have a question for you, is okay. Would you even want to go to an E3 at this point?
This is such an interesting question for us as a site, and obviously we won't. That's not really an issue for this year, but like in 2022, theoretically, like I don't know, right? Like because you've been to E3 is part of this too, right? Whereas I've never been to E3 still.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. We've each been in this industry, whatever, long enough to where, like, we each would have grown up being like, that was kind of the dream, is to like cover an E3. Like I remember even back 5 years ago, right? That was something that was like, that was the goal. You go to like PAX East, PAX West, and like eventually try to build up enough like whatever to where like E3 will let you in, and to see it shift so much in the course of like 5 to 6 years, right, from my time pre-IP, and now through that nerdy, I honestly don't know. I would say for sure if we did go, it would be such a weird show to cover, right? Because PAX, I feel like it's easier to cover PAX almost as press than it is an E3 at this point now. And because I feel like it's like shifted so much consumerist, but like hasn't figured out like the media side of what that means yet really fully, especially for like smaller outlets. And I don't know, we could look at doing things like maybe like half the site goes, right? Like maybe we get like, 2 or 3 of us to go or something like that. Like I just don't know what, because I wouldn't go by myself. Like I wouldn't go like as a consumer. I've been on the record for years. I would never go to any of these shows as a consumer by myself. Like I'm all just like, no, unless I'm going as like part of a group, either as like, just like to hang out there or to cover. It's like I just is not like my kind of event that I love to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I would only go as like, again in that vein, as like part of that nerdy, and I don't know what that would look like for us. Like theoretically, we could go to cover it for like 2 days and then also extend it into like a week-long LA trip with like Ben and Joey could come down and something like that, and like Lauren. But yeah, I don't know. It's a great question.
Yeah, I don't think. Especially with the changes they've made in recent years, I don't think we'd ever get approved to cover it like as a site. We're way too small. And even when I went, technically as an IGN freelancer, when I went, I didn't see any demos behind closed doors or anything like that. Like I basically was effectively a consumer there. I just didn't have to pay for the badge, and that was the first year that they did consumer badges. And in recent years, by pretty much all accounts, they've just really cracked down on like who they're even giving media badges to, and they're just basically inviting people to like, hey, if you want to attend, you come, buy a consumer badge. Because like if we were to go, the only way we would get any kind of demos from anybody of note would be if we have like contacts at those companies, and right now we don't. Whereas like PAX, they'll bombard us with invites to come see games and stuff like that. So like for me, I never need to go back to E3. I don't. Yeah. It was. I mean, kind of like you touched on. It was. Since I remember going into my senior year, a guy in my class, Ari, went to PAX to E3 that summer, and I always remember he brought me back because he knew I was into video games. He brought back like some of the swag that he got from the event and gave me the demo disc for .hack Infection on the PS2, and ended up getting me into that entire series. But I remember like just talking to him and his experience and being like, oh, I want to go to E3 someday. And so when I got to do that a few years ago, it was really cool, but it also like opened my eyes to like, if you're not on the inside, that's a drastically worse experience. It would still be cool to get to see friends in the industry and stuff, but there's still, even there's like a hierarchy of things. Like I will see and hang out with the what's good people or the kind of funny people briefly, but I'm not going to get invited to the same parties that they're getting invited to or something like that. So like there's very little appeal to ever really going back. Especially, anything in terms of coverage wise that we would want for it, we can pretty much see, from here. Like going hands on with all that stuff isn't going to do us a ton of numbers, let alone do us any kind of good there. So, that's kind of my thoughts on it overall. So like if we were to, as a team, decide we wanted to go, we would pretty much all be having to pay our own way and make that as a conscious choice of like, just like we could if my original intent was, if we hadn't been approved for PAX badges last year, would have been like, and because I bought PAX badges just in case, would be like, hey, we'll go, we'll like cover the event as if we're covering the event, but we're not technically press or whatever, or media or whatever, influence, whatever the categories they throw at people.
I think for me, it's one where I would rather use the expenses of that trip for either like that nerdy kind of live gathering for like an anniversary meetup kind of thing for all of us together, whether it's this year or next year, or whether it's we do almost a like that nerdy in Cali kind of thing where we like meet up with Ben and do something out there, or go somewhere. Like I'd much rather use it for one of those things that I think benefits the site more, both from a content creation standpoint and also just from a like mental health standpoint, and like us just gonna do fun things together, than using the expenses to, I mean, especially for, as the person along with Frank, I guess, and Jazz also, who are the furthest out from California, right? Like the flight for you and Cam is not that bad, and I can't imagine the ticket's too bad. For us, it's a little bit more, although we are fortunate where we have nobody in the East Coast at any point in time in that news history. It's like the opposite of IP in that regard. But I still think I'd much rather just us all either come to Austin or go to Phoenix and do like a big live event together and just have like celebrate like an anniversary event weekend kind of thing, or just something outside of that together, or you save that money and go to a PAX West, right, if that were to theoretically happen, or really save it up, I guess, for PAX East 2022, then use it for, because it's just so much money, I think, like you said, for so little kind of return on that investment, whereas I think we'd get so much more from some of the other things we could actually all do in terms of us coming together for an event. But we will hop into the shout-out section of the show. Trevor out here with 2 shout-outs this week. Trevor, what are your shout-outs?
Now I got to go and dig them up and find them again. One of them was a piece from Kotaku's
Kotaku.
Stephen Totilo before. Well, both of them are from Kotaku, I guess. So Stephen Totilo, who is no longer with Kotaku, he basically announced he was moving on last week. But this was one of his last pieces that he put out there. It was a piece called "Here's How Video Game Embargoes and Other Restrictions Work," and it was basically just kind of spawning off of all the conversations around Cyberpunk. It was a whole in-depth, thing of here's the trade-offs of embargoes and what we get from publishers, and sometimes they're crazy with restrictions, and a whole bunch of legalese and shit like that doesn't make any sense. And then other times it's hey, use your best judgment. Please don't include spoilers or something like that. And devs that are just kind of more cool and chill about it. So I thought it was it's nothing there was really particularly new to me, but it's one of those things for people that aren't as deep in this. And certainly I don't know if we'll ever get to the size where we'll have to deal with some of the really in-depth NDAs that that go out with these kinds of things.
Trevor's not prepared for our crazy 2022, guys.
Nope. Especially since we haven't had a written review on the site in almost a year or whatever. So yeah, I just thought it was a really cool read, and it's one to just serve as a good reminder for all that stuff. Just in terms of yes, CDPR was an anomaly in the system, but it also was very similar to most other game reviews that are out there. So there weren't huge red flags that in hindsight we see as red flags. So that was one. Another one that I had was also again from Kotaku here. For the streamer from The Last of Us bunny meme, virality led to death threats over things she never did, by Nathan Grayson. And I tweeted out effectively. So Emma Negaorix Montgomery is a Twitch streamer who kind of rose to initial popularity a few years back when she was playing The Last of Us, and thought the bunny moment at the beginning of Winter was so cute, and then just immediately the bunny dies, and she had a very visceral reaction to it. Went viral for that. I did not realize that it was that same person who went viral.
I didn't either, yeah.
Just a week or so ago when some troll kind of popped into her chat and made some sexist comments, and she just without missing a beat and continuing to play Dead by Daylight, just kind of went on a very poised kind of rant against the guy. And the bullshit that that kind of all ensued, with kind of the closing bit of it being you think you're the hero in your own story, but you're a footnote in everybody else's. It's
such a good line, by the way.
Perfect. So I did not realize those were the same person. And this kind of article not only made me realize they're the same person, but also the meme of her reacting to the bunny apparently blew so out of control that when somebody decided to green screen it, they just started having her have that reaction to a ton of other things, and she would start getting death threats because dumbass kids are seeing her reaction to a Minecraft video that she's never played, and giving her shit for it, and saying how I'm gonna kill you, it's just Minecraft, what do you and so it's an aspect of that meme that I never would have even thought about, even though I've seen variations of that meme, that people just are that fucking stupid that they don't realize there's an element of it when you're a dumbass that see what you are believing is seeing, and you're seeing it there and not realizing that it's something completely different, but also that's just a completely reprehensible response to that, even if it is a reaction to your favorite game or whatever. Fuck that noise. And so
it is my favorite game, right? That's my thing, is that The Last of Us has been talked about many times, my favorite game of all time. That meme, that gif is so fucking good. It's such a great moment. It's the thing. It doesn't make me how dare she not? It's it's awesome. It's such a great pure moment. And I think I even responded to the tweet that you had tweeted out. I also did not realize it was the same person. It's incredible. I can't heap enough praise on her response to the troll. That whole video, as people who sit in front of microphones for hours, for years now, the amount of poise and absence of ums or likes or any sort of pauses or stutterings or anything, like she just nailed it with so much poise while playing a hard video game. Incredible. And absolutely just like, it blew me away. It is such a articulate, passionate, forceful, just obliteration of this insignificant troll.
Yeah, and the bunny meme thing also just recently celebrated kind of a 2-year anniversary, and she kind of tweeted out about that, and she had a great kind of response to that too, because she basically said, it's been 2 years and I'm so sick of people still replying to this clip like, lol, women always over emotional, am I right? Where she basically said, like, if you can't comprehend how people care deeply for characters or get invested in stories, that's a you problem, not a whammon thing. You okay, bro? That was kind of her tweet response. Because obviously, like, the moment that you see in that meme is the bunny bit, but she's also emotionally devastated from what happens right before that in the game.
Yeah.
And that, is playing a huge factor in that. So, like, yeah, this, I want to say it's like 17 seconds or whatever that her life has been defined by as a result of that.
Yeah.
Is a very powerful thing. But it's also like, I look at that and I've never once thought like down on her. Like when I first started seeing that meme, a year or so ago or whatever, I thought like, oh, that is a really cool visceral reaction to that moment in that game. Like I would love to have something hit me that hard, but like, years of studying theater and dramatic storytelling and stuff just kind of like prepare me a little bit. So like I'm having to break down a shield before I'm ever that vulnerable when experiencing something like that. So when I do, it's that much more impactful, but it's also like I'm experiencing all of those things alone to myself, like never with an audience. Like it's one of the elements of like, I like why streaming doesn't completely appeal to me or anything like that. Is like I like having those things for me, not for a broader thing. Even if especially because like as soon as somebody's watching me or something, I'm going to have a different reaction to the thing.
Yes.
Like either
100%.
I feel like I have to have an amplified reaction to something, a la like a Demon Souls stream or something like that, or I'm somehow letting them down if I do that, or because I'm focused on the chat and trying to maintain that or something, I will be missing things in the game itself, which makes it that much harder to connect to the game. So the fact that she had that emotional response while having a chat of an audience and responding to that in that game, just more impactful. And so yeah, like to fast forward 2 years and see how like I hate how like coded the phrase seems, but like how well spoken she is in that. Again, kind of like you touched on, after 10 years, 15 years now of public speaking and being on stage and theater and then going into podcasting and that kind of stuff, I wish I had a day as lucid as she is in that whole clip, which there might be some like clever editing stuff. I haven't looked at it too carefully or anything like that. But yeah, the fact that she just like it is, you can tell it is a thing that has boiled up for so long that she's just kind of getting it all out and does it so eloquently is a beautiful thing. So, so yeah, the fact that like this tied both of those great stories together and also kind of like shone a light on the despicable things that she's had to deal with because she was invested in a game. And people have taken that and twisted it for other joke purposes, which are almost always entirely like joke things, but people see it, don't know the source video or something like that, don't know it's a joke, don't know it's a modification on that meme or something like that, and have such a disgusting visceral reaction. Just kind of like I almost want to basically be like, hey, you can't play video games or communicate in the online space until you are mature enough to have those conversations and not be a dumbass little troll that is your immediate reaction is going to be to threaten somebody's life on this shit. Like, what the fuck is wrong with people?
Yeah. Everyone go follow her. She is brilliant. I've actually looked at a few more of her clips after the kind of very, like you said, very lucid, brilliant monologue she gave. I looked at a few more things. She's very funny. She's very talented. So everyone go check her out, please. And we can probably somehow put a link to follow her on Twitch.
It's Nega
in the show notes. Thank you very much, Trevor, right there. And yeah, my shout out also one that will get people nice and heated as well. But we're shifting to the sports world. There are lots of different options to pick here. I just happened to choose one from Newsweek, but there are plenty of great writing about it. The story is simply Tom Brady versus Colin Kaepernick, Super Bowl 55 Conjures quarterback political debate by Scott McDonald. Again, there's lots of great writing about this, and the difference in how these two quarterbacks are treated. It is, one could argue, very weird what the difference is. Each are very much political figures. One just happens to be different in, some might say, one way, and how he looks than the other. No, but it's a great article. I think the entire conversation on the fact that Tom Brady's a piece of shit, as Trevor so articulately put in one of his tweets, I couldn't agree with more. Seems to be lost somehow, right? I think in the midst of this debate about whether or not he's the GOAT or not in football, I still think he's not, is the fact that maybe it doesn't matter if he's an asshole, right? Like, maybe that is a more pressing issue right here and right now, right? It's not that Tom Brady is a Republican and also a quarterback. That in itself is not necessarily a terrible thing about him, right? It's that he's a MAGA-loving, Trump-loving figure who supported someone who tried to overthrow the entire government of the United States of America less than a month ago. I think it's that part that is a little bit more upsetting to people, whereas Colin Kaepernick was just peacefully protesting the racial injustice and systemic system of racism in the country, and was literally blackballed out of the league in shocking and rapid fashion. And I think the article itself from Newsweek goes into this, and kind of the political differences and kind of how they've each navigated it. Tom Brady also didn't wear a mask going to the stadium, but of course, pandemic is not real. But also versus, I think, these two kind of figures' cultural impacts and cultural identities and stories. It's a really good article. I've read lots of really good articles. If I can refine some of them, I'll share those as well for the show notes. There's been a lot of really good writing about it. And it's always an important reminder to remember that Tom Brady is an asshole. And that shouldn't be forgotten either, right? And not like a fun asshole either, where it's like Michael Jordan is like an intense individual. And like, yeah, he's like kind of an asshole, but like in a way where he's like just so committed to winning. In a way where it's like, oh, you're just like maybe not a good person, asshole. And that's less fun, and more important to call out. But yeah, I just want to give that a shout out. There's again lots of good writing all about that.
Yeah,
otherwise,
I obviously I don't follow sports nearly enough to really
even
weigh
Trevor
in on
knows.
that. But like, yeah, I saw a number of tweets yesterday in the timeline, given the Super Bowl and all that stuff was going on, and somebody was like, somebody basically tried to dunk on Tom Brady of like, oh, here's why he's a bad guy or whatever. It was like, what, like some player, or Tom Brady yells at some player and that player got like the penalty called on him. And the tagline of the tweet was basically like, this is why people hate Tom Brady. And I almost quote tweeted it with like, I thought it was because he was a MAGA jackass. But like hearing you kind of talk about it, it registered for me that he is maybe the poster child of people separating the art from the artist kind of,
that's
idea.
Great. I think it's totally fair.
Where like obviously a ton of people and pretty much anybody who's not now, I guess, a Buccaneers fan hates Tom Brady, but like the people that like Patriots fans for all those years and now Buccaneers fans that like get behind him and will like they will do that despite knowing he's a shit person, because he wins them championships and he gets them notoriety and all that stuff. In the same way that like I mean, the one I would think about, is just dating me or aging me or whatever, is like Chris Brown for the longest time, was a shitbag of a guy who, had plenty of abuse allegations and stuff, but people liked his music, so he more or less got a pass and kept getting invited to shit. And yeah, Tom Brady is up there in that kind of, upper echelon of people that people will look the other way because they like one aspect of what the guy can do professionally, as opposed to reflecting on the whole and being like, hey, no, fuck that guy.
I think throughout the history of the United States, politics and sports have been so entwined in ways that are both really explicit and cold and clear cut, like the fact that no people who weren't white played in the major leagues until 1947 and Jackie Robinson. That it was very clear cut why this is the case. It wasn't because they weren't good enough. Two ways not even that much less subtle, like Muhammad Ali not wanting to go fight in Vietnam, and having his title stripped from him and being almost sent to jail for it, to Michael Jordan, as is shown in The Last Dance, like having his own reservations about being too political because, you can't be an outspoken black man in the 80s and even 90s in America without that drawing a huge backlash against you. I think these backlashes and these people getting taken out of peg and these figures who are kind of part of a lightning storm against them seemingly have lots of things in common. Usually they're not white, and usually, not even usually, to be clear, always their causes and the things they're supporting are more liberal, more progressive, and almost always centered around the idea of expanding equality and justice and, freedoms to more people within the country than less. And the figures in sports who are racist, either openly or not, who are anti-Semitic, who are homophobic, who are just far right, going back all the way to Ty Cobb in the early 1900s in baseball to today, are ones who are, enshrined in the Hall of Fame and who are still talked about and who are still revered as figures in the sports history, and seem to have significantly fewer controversies. And if you think there's not a reason for this, then I'd maybe ask you simply just open your eyes a bit more and read a bit more and listen a bit more. And I think this article is a great starting point, and I think there are lots of good features and books and articles and films and documentaries that you can go check out as well.
Yeah, I will quote the this tweet this meme that makes the rounds. It's from the Enola Holmes movie that came to Netflix last year.
Okay.
It's the character saying, talking to Holmes in the thing, because Holmes basically says, politics don't interest me. I'm bored by them. And she basically responds, politics doesn't interest you. Why? Because you have no interest in changing a world that already suits you. And that's pretty much, at the core of what has happened here between Brady and Kaepernick is the powers that be that run the NFL didn't were not interested in changing the status quo when Colin Kaepernick is out there peacefully protesting. So they have no problem blackballing him, but defending or continuing to support Tom Brady, because they're basically all in that power club. And so changing the system that is working for them is the least, the bottom of their mind. All the tweets that went around over the last day of the NFL's, dedicating $250 million to fight against racial injustice. It's like, that's a lot of money to avoid saying you did Colin Kaepernick wrong. So yeah, it's even as an outsider, seeing that is disgusting and just makes me even less inclined to ever bother getting into football.
Yes. Agreed. But that is the show. You can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, like all of our wonderful patrons and supporters have. It is the second show of the month now, I suppose. But we're still at the beginning of the month, and so we always like to shout you out extra there because your privileges probably just went through. And again, your support means the world to all of us. It literally makes this show and others like that D Plus show happen, and it keeps the lights running over at that nerdy site. And we are very, very, very forever thankful for that. That wasn't a good sentence, but it's okay. Nonetheless, again, you can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. There are Patreon-exclusive podcasts you can go check out, and we've been on a really good roll on those. If I do say myself, I've really enjoyed the Patreon-exclusive episodes these past few months. I say it's like 6 months we've really been cooking here. As well as all other kinds of goodies. Whatever, I'm fucking it up at the end here. Overall,
that's why you need to have a doc.
I had it too. No, I'm looking at last week's doc too. That's the thing. I just can't read now.
There was a moment when we were doing when we were recording that Nerdy Site show yesterday. Like I started into the rigmarole of the show, and I almost just went into the D Plus show by default. And so it's weird that now becomes the default rigmarole for me. But like if I had not been looking at the words on the screen, I would have definitely introed the wrong show. We would have had to restart.
But nonetheless, again, you can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. I dare say we've got a few podcasts that are worth the $1. You can also go support us by liking, subscribing, and sharing with your friends on podcast services and social medias all over the world there. It really does make a difference and helps get more eyes and ears on the shows. You can also go subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow us on Twitch, I believe is the vernacular there. And rate and review us on iTunes. Give us those 5 stars. Tell us what you like about us. Trevor will read them 5 months later, and it makes me happy. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything that you want to plug?
So this goes up Wednesday. So the Let's Play that went live yesterday, because I've just like the next one in the docket for that retro gaming show is Mega Man 2, and I just keep wanting to put that off. I'm not looking forward to sitting down with that one. So I've gone so far as to start recording a demo of the Maiden demo from Resident Evil, but I got stuck.
Really?
I got stuck like in the very beginning. I was like, and I couldn't figure out, and I was like, you know what, this is just a bad idea. I'm not going to enjoy this. So I scrapped that, but instead I sat down with Balan Wonderworld, the demo for that game. And so that's what is going live on tomorrow as we're recording this, but yesterday as this goes live. So check that demo out if you want to see me just baffled and confused at like the decisions this game makes, because that's pretty much the epitome of it. Like the game is like rightfully getting maligned a lot, I think. But I went to it mostly sight unseen. Like I'd heard people kind of talking about it on Twitter and stuff, or seeing like people tweeting about the game. But I wasn't like checking out their reactions or what they were saying about it. And so I picked up the demo, hopped into it, and was just like, wow, this is a choice. No choices I would make, but they made choices. So you can catch me playing that as this week's Let's Play.
Excellent choice, like always. You can go find me at LeffyLogie or LeffyLoggy, LOGGY, all on the internet. I will follow up that and also give Trevor a shout out as well. Just for all of the video content on that YouTube page. It's very, very good, and he's doing lots of great work over there. I'm also going to give him a shout out for his and Cam's conversation on that D Plus show about Robin Hood, because it's a great movie and it makes me very, very happy. And then finally, I'm going to give a shout out to myself and Trevor's episode of That Nerdy Site Show that went live 2 days ago when you're listening to this, that we kind of talked about a little bit at the beginning of the episode. I had a lot of fun with that. I can't speak for Trevor, but he at least tolerated it. We predicted and kind of made some wild guesses about the James Bond video game cast, among other things. It was just a fun show, I thought, all around. And so there's lots of good That Nerdy content out this week, including, hopefully, eventually, Trevor playing Mega Man 2 for your enjoyment as well. Certainly my enjoyment will be made out of that.
I mean, if you're listening to this the day this goes live, tomorrow's Let's Play is either going to be Mega Man 2 or Trevor plays the Maiden demo of RE Village, depending on just how much more I want to put
he will
off.
Definitely love.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like I'm in for a crappy day of recording a Let's Play sometime in the next day or two.
Otherwise, you can go follow That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site. And for myself, for Trevor, and for all of us over here at That News You Care About, thank you for listening. Play your games and be good to each other.